Welcome everyone to this Parcel Monitor Fireside Chat. Today we're going to look at fulfillment strategies for direct-to-consumer brands, and I'm very excited to today have Nabil with me. He is the Vice President for Global E-Commerce at DHL Supply Chain, and very much looking forward to the discussion and getting a sense of his perspective on direct-to-consumer e-commerce. But before we get started, Nabil, one question for you. Is it possible you can introduce yourself without mentioning the words logistics and e-commerce?
Yeah, hi, Arne. Thank you very much for having me. So what I do is basically helping companies to enable the distribution of their product whenever they are sold online, and to make sure that their consumers are getting this product in a good state very quickly at a very competitive cost.
Wonderful.
That was pretty good, no?
It was, and it's always a challenge, anyone that works in this domain, to do this introduction without mentioning those words. So really appreciate that. But I think for us to get started, when we talk about direct-to-consumer e-commerce, what is kind of direct-to-consumer e-commerce for you? What are the main characteristics that you think about when talking about this domain?
Yeah, I think direct-to-consumer is actually one of the major trends that we see in the industry. I think the primary reason is if you look back a couple of years, most of the companies were trying to sell online, but they were not really a strong definition as to what is the best channel and why each channel is important, and how do you basically build your strategy by channel, depending on your consumer base, depending on your product. So what we saw was many companies went for the easiest. I build a website, or I go to marketplaces, right? Or I do both. So what happened is now companies are getting more sophisticated, and they realize that, for example, marketplaces have a lot of benefit because you get a lot of traffic, you have a lot of people that can see your product, but you lose, to a certain extent, the relationship with the customer. In certain cases, you even lose the data of who is buying your product. So you don't have that consumer relationship with your brands. So what we see is, particularly like the premium brands or the companies that really think that their relationship with consumers is critical for their success, which is basically all the best brands. I think we can describe them as easy as this. But so these brands have started a journey to really take back the control of their consumer relationships online. And that's why you've seen so many announcements and so many companies of the large organization going back and saying, well, we're going to build our own channel. We're going to build our direct consumer strategy, and we're going to go direct basically into selling online and be in control of our destiny. The other thing that is happening is you see a lot of digitally native brands that are born and that have been very successful. You know, and if we go back a couple of years, probably one of the most successful story was Dollar Shave Club. But since then, you've seen so many from, you know, Allbirds and all these kind of brands that have been very successful in starting online and starting with a direct-to-consumer only strategy. And I think that's also what has raised the importance of this approach. And that's why now we see many people looking at that as you know, the primary channel, right? And I think the last thing I want to say is, in COVID, that's a bit more recent. During COVID, when a restriction started to happen and some of the marketplaces had to prioritize product, what we saw also was many companies were actually dependent on the marketplaces to actually sell and reach their consumers. And so many companies have realized how dependent they were on some of these marketplaces to actually reach and sell their product. So I think that also has raised the importance of building the channel that you can control and that you can also really build in the long term. And obviously, I'm not even going to enter into the financial part of it, which is obvious, but obviously, you know, you have higher margins when you are direct consumers, right?
No, 100%. And there are a lot of brands who make it very, very public that they have very high ambitions to make direct consumer a very important part of their business. So, for example, Adidas recently announced that direct to consumer is meant to be at least half of their sales by 2025, which is a big number given where they started from. I think this whole trend is probably emphasized by the pandemic and the shift to online and e-commerce. So, but I think from your perspective, what is their end game? So, what's the target share? What is the total share that direct consumer will have for these big global brands?
Yeah, so Adidas made the announcement. Nike made also a similar announcement a bit before, actually. Last year I was very surprised by I think it was Q2 results when the pandemic has started, of Apple, which sold I think $25 billion of iPhones online on their website, with all the stores being closed. So I think what we're gonna see is obviously COVID has generated an acceleration of that journey and the importance of that. But I do think that these brands, I think 50% is not the end game. I would think that like the premium brands will probably go after like more of a 75-80% of their sales that's going to be direct to consumers. And they will keep, certainly, there is always going to be, I think, a play with distributors. There will be a play in certain geographies where it makes more sense to have partners. But keep in mind that this channel allows you also to sell into markets where you don't need a physical infrastructure, right? So that element of direct consumer is also very important when you start to think about brands that have been selling, let's say, in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, through large distributor or large wholesalers. Now they can get direct, they can sell online, of course, they can ship cross-border, and they can reach these markets. So I think 50% is not the end game. I think it's going to be higher.
Oh, okay, that's great to hear. If we get to somewhere like 75%, there will be a dramatic shift to the way their retail fulfillment is done. So I think if you look at the traditional models, probably very large shipments to wholesale partners, kind of store replenishment. So it requires very, very different infrastructure setups in warehouses for brands. Now, moving to direct to consumer, what are the main kind of changes these brands have to do in order to get ready to shift such a kind of in such a dramatic manner to direct to consumer?
Yeah, so I think this is a journey, right? I think it's not a radical change that I would think happen overnight. It takes a lot of effort, right? I think when you think about transforming a fulfillment operation from a store wholesale channel, which is primarily a pallet-based and carton-based, to individual orders and unit picks to final consumers, the level of complexities are very different. And so what you see usually is that brands go and they transition gradually, and there's different approach. There's companies that decide to go for a large independent network that is exclusively going to be a servicing and be basically doing the fulfillment for all these direct to consumer individual orders, and they keep the store or the wholesale channel separated. And we see other companies that say, no, we're going to leverage and we're going to build truly omni-channel facilities that are going to be fulfilling both, right? I think when you do decide to fulfill both within the same building, there are a couple of things like, how do you prioritize order? How do you manage resources between the two channels? How do you manage process flows between the two that are quite different? A good example is in e-commerce, the rate of returns is way higher, right, than in traditional fulfillment. So how do you manage, two different flows? If you're going to start to have, like, maybe in your online channel, you might have maybe 10, 20, 30, or we see even in some cases 40% of returns. So there's not like a good or bad strategy. It's rather that you need to be aware of what are going to be these differences, and that you need to build a model that actually fits. And you always have to keep in mind that the most important is what is the service level that you want to reach, because that's going to be the biggest consideration for the network you need to build. And I think that's the key starting question.
That sounds very interesting. For me, one of the key questions is this trend to a kind of a more direct-to-consumer fulfillment a good news for companies like DHL? Is that a growth opportunity, or you're just shifting from one business model to the next? What's your thought about that?
You know, I think it's definitely a big opportunity. You know, we company like ours thrive in complexity, right? That's where we bring the biggest value. That's where we are really able to differentiate ourselves. You know, when you manage businesses that are pretty simple, you know, that's not where, you know, a partner can really bring a lot of sophistication, technology, processes, methodology. So we see that as a big opportunity. We manage multiple large direct-to-consumer businesses already for many years. And I think we're going to continue to see that being like a very large opportunity because of the complexity that is behind, not only in a pure direct-to-consumer, but really when you merge pure direct-to-consumer with also traditional fulfillment, that we have multiple sites as well like that. So I think we're gonna see this as a growth path for us.
Fantastic. So from I think if you look at contract logistics, obviously they thrive for very big, large facilities, very long-run contracts. So if you look at the direct-to-consumer brands, they probably like the idea of distributed inventory. The business is growing very fast, but nobody knows exactly how fast. So long contract durations are usually not so easy in this kind of context. So how do you deal with those specific requirements that direct-to-consumer fulfillment has on DHL in the future?
Yeah, so I think that there's maybe two major ways of looking at this. One is you have the large dedicated type of buildings that will be actually servicing also direct-to-consumer brands, but of very large scale. And then you have the multi-user sites that have been really like the preferred model for many fast-growing direct-to-consumer brands or for like a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. And so historically, or the core of the business that I lead and I manage is primarily like large organizations that we focus on. However, in the last couple of years, we've started to build a services that are way more adapted, also that are very flexible for companies that are looking for transactional model. So we have, for example, a solution across Europe, which is called the European Fulfillment Network, that is targeted specifically for these companies that have a need of a transactional model, shorter-term commitment, giving you more flexibility in order to reach like across multiple geographies and cities in Europe and be faster to consumers. So we have developed certain solutions that are also targeting that segment with a lot of success as well.
That sounds great, particularly given that e-commerce also moves into the direction of kind of a very, very fast-growing Kickstarter campaign coming out of nothing, however, growing to a significant volume. So I think it's great that you embrace that flexibility. One of the things that also a lot of people mention when it comes to direct-to-consumers, the whole fulfillment part gets a lot closer to the end consumer, whereas for traditional kind of delivery to distributors and stores, the kind of customer is very, very far away, the end customer. So however, with direct to consumer, you really have a direct impact on the customer relationship. Do you feel that it kind of also puts a different emphasis on the way you have to do your service in order to deliver a customer experience for those brands that you work with? How much of that is a discussion with your customers at the moment?
Yeah, so this is very important. I'll give you the best example. A couple of maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I started, we were having this conversation around service levels, and how do you compare, you know, service levels in e-commerce compared to another traditional fulfillment operation. And the client we were having the conversation was a client that was shipping 100,000 orders per day, right? So when you think about that and you say, well, is 95 or 98% on-time delivery good? The answer is probably no, because even at 98%, what you're saying is you're going to let 2,000 consumers be unsatisfied with your service level per day, right? And that's pretty bad, right? I think we will all agree that that's pretty bad at that scale. But independent of your scale, it doesn't change the fact that even if you're like missing on 2%, or even on 1%, you're still going to make unsatisfied customers directly, which is very different than when you're shipping to a store or you're shipping to a wholesale channel, where if the product is maybe has been picked wrong, or is the packaging is damaged, or whatever may happen, you can always take actions before it impacts the customer. So I think that's number one, right? So quality in operation is extremely important. The second thing is, when you start to think about these direct-to-consumer brands, the ones that are particularly only doing online, e-commerce becomes the only experience, the box and the product itself, and the digital experience of post-purchase become the only experience that they have with your brand. They don't see anybody, they don't speak to anybody. So that experience is extremely critical. The way you communicate with them, the way you notify them about delay, or about the product on the way, and the way the product arrives, the packaging, the unboxing experience that many DTC brands had put a lot of emphasis on, is absolutely critical, because that's the whole experience, right? I mean, how many people came to you and told you, oh, I had this amazing online experience when you get the product, the packaging, the unboxing experience is amazing. That's what the consumer remembers about, right? But of course, on the software side, when you get also notifications and you are informed of what is happening, that enhances your trust, your certainty, and also your relationship with the brand, right? Your package is on the way. Your package is got delivered, and you get pictures and you get that information. That just makes you feel better, right? I mean, we like that. We like to be informed as consumers.
And I think you see a lot of improvement there. One of the questions I always ask, if you ask somebody, do you want a better experience or worse experience? The answer is always very clear. The question is whether the brands are willing to pay for that extra kind of extra experience, the better packaging, the faster delivery, the faster turnaround time, the kind of the later cutoffs, etc. So I think that's the question most kind of fulfillment providers probably face is, are the customers ready to really say, hey, we're willing to pay extra for exactly this kind of additional service levels, because this matters to the customers and therefore it matters to us. Do you see that trend in the market, or are we still a little bit away from that?
Yeah, so I think I see two groups, right? I think the leading DTC brands, the ones that are very successful, I think they understand that this is part of the success factors, right? I think it's part of what differentiates you from just another organization. So I think they get it. They are already on the way. They either do it already to a certain extent, or they are working on doing it. But then you have still a lot of organizations that are still defining what their e-commerce really strategies or key value propositions are. And these are large organizations, right? A lot of large organizations that are still trying to figure out what to do. And I think in that case, they are certainly not there yet. So I think there is still a huge upside in this space going forward. But there are still people that needs to be convinced that it's actually worth the effort and worth the money.
No, for sure. And I think from what we observe already with the pandemic, a lot more people kind of are convinced from these things being a nice to have, it becoming a must have for more and more brands. But if you look in the future, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, what are the up and coming trends and things that you're getting ready or geared up for? Something we're not yet expecting. Any interesting thoughts and ideas you have on what's next in D2C e-commerce?
There are two big things I think that we're gonna see, which you're in Asia, so you see that already. Asia is the most advanced, China particularly the most advanced market in e-commerce, evolution. But I think the big thing, first of all, is going to be social commerce. The discovery of product is primarily happening on social media, right? And when you look at the West, when you look at many of the powerhouse of social media, they are pretty late to the game, right? But they are getting there right now. We saw multiple announcements the last 12 months from Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok. Everybody's going now. Now there's a wave, but the website, as we know it, might completely disappear, right? If I'm discovering products on social media primarily, particularly all the products that we buy because of inspiration, because this non-necessary product, let's say this way. If you discover it on social media, why do I need to go somewhere else to buy it, right? I transact right there, and then marketplaces obviously will keep their share because they'll remain relevant for all the things that you are specifically looking for, but that are not discovery type of purchase. So I think this is big in my view. I think this is a big topic because it's also shifting significantly the way you buy, the way you get orders, and also the amount of volume that you could be receiving from from a fulfillment side, as an example, right? I had a couple of stories where within our business we'll get huge spikes of orders suddenly for one customer, and that was not planned. And when you look back and you're like, why is that? Why? It was because one picture of maybe an athlete or someone famous would have gone viral with a specific product that was visible, right? And then you're like, wow. So what it means is, as you move forward towards more of transaction happening on social media, you're gonna start to see spikes maybe at 11 p.m. because something is happening. And then, depending on what you committed in service level, if your cutoff time for orders is midnight, well, you need you might have to start to ship like tens of thousands of orders, in the evening, whatever that might be. But this has an impact across multiple areas, not only as to who control the relationships and who own the transaction. It's more profound than this. And the other thing I think which is going to be big is the growth of B2B e-commerce. And when you think about that, today we talk about consumers, direct to consumer, as an individual brand, person, an individual. But if you think about a B2B, many B2B business also use wholesale channel. They use distributors. And when you think about, let's say I'm an organization that sells coffee, right? Can I sell my coffee now to all the restaurants and all the hotels, conferences, offices, co-working spaces directly? Why do I need to go for a distributor? If I can build a logistic behind, can I enable direct sales to them? Of course, right? So I think that's also one of the big things that we're going to see. And maybe I'll add one, which I think is very important as well, is the topic of sustainability. I think sustainability is really moving from a nice to have to an absolute must. Sustainability is already on the table for a couple of years, but now it's becoming a criteria of selection for companies you do business with. It's starting to become, and it's not only sustainability, right? It's really diversity, governance, ethical standards. So what we call ESG, right? But these topics are moving from nice to have to criteria of selections when you select a company to work with, or you're going to do business with. So I think, and in e-commerce, there's a lot of people that are complaining because many people will argue that it's a less sustainable way to do business than traditional retail, for example. I don't think it's proven to be true. There's contradicting stats around that. I'm not sure about what is the reality, but for sure, reusable packaging, optimization of packaging, management of returns, giving a second, third life cycle to product, refurbishing items, all these things, a second-hand closing, all these things are happening, and they're gonna be big between now and 2030. They're gonna become major areas of businesses.
Oh, thanks a lot. These are interesting prospects from the shift of e-commerce towards more social media and B2B, and kind of adding that notion of sustainability, as well as more and more second-hand reuse economy growing over time, really shifting the market, the way logistics is done, but also the player ecosystem. So I think these are exciting times ahead. Nabil, thanks a lot for joining me today. It has been very insightful. And thanks for joining us at the Parcel Monitor community for this fireside chat.
Thank you, Arne. Thank you for the team. It was great to be here. Cheers.